Okay, so recording, it should be on cart. Once a panelist join, find your cart provider.
So yeah, they don't need to be perfect either. The least that they can do is clean things up. Well, I mean, the least, yeah, that's good. The least they can do is clean it up as they go. Like, I don't really care.
So, Taylor, when you were the host, you didn't have to share the PowerPoint screen?
I did.
You did. So they just said, like, next slide.
No. So you should have received a overview sheet or something that has all those details listed.
It just says that the presenter will tell you when to.
Oh, see, mine was easy. Mine didn't have a PowerPoint, so.
Oh, mine does, so.
Ooh. Yeah, you're gonna have to be getting on that one.
I know.
Sorry about it. It's okay though, you'll be fine.
But
Just settle those things with her. Just be like, hey, so do you want to just like verbal cue me or?
I don't want her to verbal cue me. I'd rather tell her.
Don't even give her an option. Just like, hey, just cue me whenever you need me to go to the next slide.
Yeah, like.
Because you don't know what she's gonna need to transition.
Okay, so this is all about Zoom. I don't need that one.
Right, this one's good.
That's Zoom for Dummies. Yeah, she's probably, it says on my directions that the presenter will tell you when to switch the slide. Q&A, when they come in, they have designated slides to stop and answer. Slide share. Need you to share their slides. They will need to say when to advance.
Oh, perfect. See?
And then there's accessibility reminder. So I'm not saying a word. I'm just sitting there clicking next slide, next slide.
Yeah, and you can turn off your, or get it out for me. It's fun to get it. You get it out. Which is pulled up in here. But sorry.
Okay. All right, I'm gonna just walk away from it from now. I think I'm all ready to go.
Yeah, turn off your video too. You need your screen.
Yeah.
All, my name is Kimberly Tiso, and I'm an April board member and facilitator for today's call for the session Blurred Lines, Redefine Your Lane. Thank you for joining us for this workshop. So I want to mention a few housekeeping items before we get started today. First, when you scroll over to the screen, a menu bar pops up. Depending on what device you are on, you can find that menu bar at the top of the bottom of the screen. This is where you will find closed captioning for today's session. You can view the captioning by selecting the CC tab on the menu bar. Stream text is also available for today's call. You can find that conference website on connection instructions for the session. For sign language interpreting, you can find the interpreter on the screen. To join the chat, please find the word bubble in the same menu bar. Once that is selected, that will allow you to follow along with the chat or add in your comments. For question and answer times, please note that question and answer box is on the menu bar. Please only submit questions there, as you may get lost in the chat, but I will be sure to be monitoring that. To ask a question or make a comment, you can also select the hand option on the menu, and that allows us to know you have a question. For those of you on the phone today or using keystrokes, we ask you that you please press *9 on your keypad to raise your hand. We will then let you know when to unmute you. Remember, if you join in a conversation, please keep all background noises down as much as possible to allow us to hear you clearly. Now I'm going to pass it to your presenters, but first I'm going to tell you a little bit about them. Shelly Simmons is the Executive Director of the Statewide Independent Living Council of Georgia. A graduate from California State University, Long Beach, Shelly has worked as a disability navigator, benefit specialist, and client assistance program coordinator in California. After relocating to Georgia, she continued working in IL and reached out to the Statewide Independent Living Council and served as a board member, vice president, and chair before accepting the assistant director position. In 2016, Shelly was appointed executive director of the Silk in Georgia. Kim has been the executive director for Washington State Independent Living Council for 4 years. Kim has a long history of working in social justice for organizations including the Women's Foundation of Oregon, the Council for the Homeless, as a consultant. Her work ranges from strategic planning, program development, and partnerships, consensus building. Kim has presented at the National Council for Independent Living Conference and the State Independent Living Council Congress Conference. So I will go ahead and pass it to your speakers. And again, if you have any questions, please move into the question box.
Good afternoon and good morning to some of you. Thank you so much for joining us today. I greatly, and I'll say we greatly appreciate your time and your participation in supporting us in this workshop. Believe it or not, this is my first April conference. I have yet to participate in a conference, but I heard how exciting, relaxed atmosphere that they provide, and I just wish that we were able to meet this year. But hopefully next year will be a different story, and I will hopefully have the opportunity to meet many of you. Please excuse me for the interpreter and the captioner. I have a tendency to speak fast, but I will try to make sure that I speak slowly. But if there's any problem, please just let me know and I will slow down once again. Thank you, Kimberly, for the introduction. Again, my name is Shelly. I am a Black woman, short haircut, 50-ish, and I live in a red state. My pronouns are her, she, and hers. And I would like to pass this on to Kimberly Connor, who was so gracious enough to work with me on this workshop. Kim?
Thank you, Shelly, and good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I go by the pronouns she, her. I am a white woman with gray, brownish hair, mostly gray, and I am 57 years old. My background is a cream-colored little space in my house. You could probably see my refrigerator off to the side. I am wearing a gray turtleneck and wearing glasses. And thank you so much for being here. And I will also try to speak slowly because I have a tendency when I'm nervous, which I think some of you heard in the beginning, this is a little nervous for me. Okay, let's see. I live in Washington State. I live in a blue state, which I think is important. Shelly and I talked about this, this will be part of our presentation and how we approach knowing our political climate and what may be some differences and what some of the things that we share that are the same. So next slide. Kimberly, I know we're having problems with the interpreter. Do you want us to pause until the interpreter can be visible, or would you like us to proceed?
The interpreter should be visible now.
Okay, thanks.
Are we still?
They're not sorry, just 1 second. Jamie, can you not do side by side? Okay. Actually, there, I got it. Sorry, folks. 1 second here.
Oh,
Sorry, Mary.
Sorry, Jamie, I had fixed it and then you unfixed it. Just 1 second. Sorry.
Okay, I'll just let you do your thing. I'm having a hard time here.
Point in that is that there are opportunities, because I think I hear a lot of times that we have a lot of barriers and gaps, which we do, in starting those conversations and really kind of always looking for those opportunities to either start conversations or develop those relationships, whether internal or external. Another, and I'm going to talk about internally a little bit, and then I'll pass it on to Shelly to talk about her experiences. On my council, we have a very small council. We have 9 council members when we're full. So we have our unique opportunities and barriers with that. And it's always, and we've just kind of in the last year and a half or so, almost had 100% changeover in council membership and makeup. So that really provides the opportunity as we learn and grow to really educate folks around IL, bringing in our centers, voice through our directors and staff to talk about specifically around center services, because not everybody has the same information or is at the same knowledge base. So we've really taken that opportunity to do some training and information, and especially, which we'll touch on a little bit later, around equitability and race, as that conversation is front and center, and really starting to begin those conversations internally with the council and wanting to continue to elevate that conversation, as well as externally with our partners that we are developing those relationships with. So I'm going to pause here and pass it over to Shelly.
thank you, Kim. And I'm just going to go back a little bit. and give my perspective on what does advocacy look like for the silks and what are some of the responsibilities that we have. For me, our basic responsibility is to ensure that people with disabilities have opportunities to live as independently as possible. We are to identify various barriers, whether structural, attitudinal, societal barriers, and address those. And for us, I feel as though sometimes we may have gotten comfortable and we're not necessarily adjusting or trying to move forward or progress in what advocacy actually looks like. In the climate in which we live now, things are just changing rapidly. And are we preparing ourselves to make those adjustments? Have we made those adjustments? I saw that there was a question in the chat, and I hope that we will be able to address that a little bit later. We're going to be talking about that. But of course, it is important for us to be willing to grow, listen, and know that everything has some type of intersectionality to it. And we need to be looking outside the box. And this is where our lines can be blurred at times, knowing when and when not to push, when and when not to speak or have anything said, or knowing who to go to when you talk about external leadership. And I think, I hope I didn't, something popped up on my screen. Okay, I think I'm okay. And where we can possibly have the best impact. So external new leadership within state agencies, similar to Kim, we have also had major changes within our VR system. Our entity we call GVRA, or the Georgia Vocational Rehabilitation Agency. Over the last 5.5 years, we've had 4 directors. And so it's a constant re-educating individuals or leadership in regards to what silks and SILs actually do. Unfortunately for us, the leadership that has come in, they have been more money management leadership and not really knowing exactly what it is the silk and the SILs do and how beneficial that we can be in helping them advocate and make change and work with individuals with disabilities. Our partners that we have, other organizations that are disability focused, is establishing some of these relationships with them. We have close relationships with our Georgia Developmental Disability Council, GCDD, our Georgia Advocacy Office. We have surprisingly really good relationship with all of our center directors. So all of these external partnerships, and again, some other things that may be relevant in your state, we feel that is key. We found that it is almost imperative to have these relationships because we want to develop small coalitions around the state. The silk is great, but Georgia actually has 159 counties. So it can be challenging to be able to go into every county and meet with some of the organizations there. But we work closely again with our centers for independent living, and they have more of a connection within the region or the areas that they service. And so when we can develop coalitions and everybody gets on the same page, we found that we are more effective in presenting our efforts towards advocacy. Internally, We know that it is important to make sure that your staff is actually on board. I'm fortunate. My council is also very small. We've had people to term off. We have people who are waiting to serve on our board, but unfortunately, our governor has yet to appoint the people that we have waiting, and that has been an issue for Georgia for quite some time. We have people who have been waiting over a year now, so it's challenging. We actually even had to go in and amend our bylaws just so that we can make sure that we got our state plan in on time, because the governor has yet to make sure that at the time that we had a functioning board. We're constantly looking for people around our state. For a time there, we had what was called metro heavy within the metro area, Atlanta and some of the surrounding counties. We had a lot of people who were actually willing to serve, but we wanted to make sure that we had a full representation of the state, and that's key. Because what works for a metro, the metro area within our state, it does not work for some of the rural areas. There's a saying here in Georgia, there's Atlanta, and then there's the rest of Georgia. You can literally drive maybe 45 minutes and be completely in a different setting. And so it's absolutely, I believe, essential to make sure that you have full state representation. Our coalition building, looking for agencies and entities that have absolutely nothing to do with disability. We found that is very helpful to us as well. We usually look for individuals who may have either direct or indirect relationship with a person with a disability, and how that works again. Again, I believe that because our climate is changing, we have to look outside the box and have other people come in and take up some of the things that we're advocating for. And that has been helpful. We know that voting is key. It's key because we should be able to, whether it's red or blue, what that representative has to offer, whether that the R or the D is in front of their or behind their name. We just want to make sure that they have a compassion or heart for people with disabilities. I tell you, even in this red state, I call myself independent because there are some things that I'm conservative about. There are some things that I'm very liberal about. But I've had more success with some of my Republican representatives than I have some of my Democratic representatives. So we know that it is key and essential to actually get to know the individual that you're working with. And they can actually become allies for you. So we believe that these are some of the best ways that we can have true and effective partnerships that will have the best impact. And actually having seats at the table. The Georgia Silk has been around for, well, almost 30 years, just under 30 years. And when I came into this position, it actually took me a while to really rebrand what and who the Silk actually is. And not that my predecessor didn't do a great job, because she truly did. Some of you may be familiar with her. Pat Puckett was here, and she was the only director. But of course, because there's been changeover within the legislature and people have retired, we have to kind of go through that process all over again. So when you can make yourself available and become a part of various councils and boards, that's also very important. Sometimes you just have to get your foot in the door, start participating in meetings, and actually make sure that your opinion and your suggestions are being heard. Kim, if there wasn't anything else, we may be able, I don't know if you want to take a break here, Kim, to answer some direct questions. We can. We really want to try to be as engaging as possible. If you have any questions, we would love to be able to answer those. And from the anonymous attendee, again, I'll read the question and hopefully we will be able to answer that a little bit later in the presentation. But the question is, how do we explain to a conservative ED that the disability and racial justice movements are intertwined, if not the same thing, when we are Caucasian? That's a very good question. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later. And if we don't answer it, if you feel that we did not answer that, we will, of course, come back and readdress that. But we have something kind of about this later in the presentation. But if there are any other questions right now, we can take that. We saw that we have people from all over. If you would like to say something, I guess, if I'm not mistaken, you need to raise your hand or put it in the chat and they will unmute you. There's one. For the Q&A, Kimberly wrote that the box is on the menu bar at the bottom, the Q&A. What is the biggest challenge of rebranding? And this is from, I don't want to butcher your name, but the last name is Franklin. The biggest challenge for me, for Georgia, in rebranding was, again, trying to, I shouldn't say take disability out, but trying to make sure that that we were being more, having more intersectionality with our branding, letting people know that, especially in regards to perhaps housing or accessibility, you know, not only is it for people with disabilities, but it can be for a senior, or if you have to have your loved one, your parents come and live with you. So just trying to bring everything in, or if your child broke his leg during soccer and, you know, you need to make sure that you have an accessible home. In regards to moving, wouldn't it be great to just be able to have a stepless entry, you know, to move your furniture in and out? So bringing people in by changing some of the language and making sure that they know that not only is it relevant for people with disabilities, but for people without disability as well. So trying to frame our branding in that way, making it more inclusive, letting people know that what affects me affects you, I think has been some of the biggest challenges. It's easy in my eyes, but again, making sure that we were able to bring in the non-disability community. We've been pretty successful with that. Rebranding is making sure also the challenges is trying to get on various councils and boards throughout the state. You know, going to what we call here the Department of Community Affairs. You know, they put all of these housing plans in place, but there was very little in regards to disability. And we started asking these questions. And sometimes people just have to kind of pause and think. And they'll say, well, we never thought about that. I was like, well, we're here. And this is some of the things that we do. We would love to be able to have a seat at the table. So again, as I was mentioning, sometimes you just have to make yourself present. It can be a very time-consuming process. But then it's just making sure that people think about some of the things that they're implementing. It's probably all around, but we have a saying or a motto here, nothing about us without us. And so again, we just want to make sure that we present ourselves at various entities, organizations, in order for us to make ourselves known. And from that, we've been able to kind of rebrand. We're starting to have more people reach out to us, looking for assistance and looking for us to provide comments on various things. And so it's been a couple of years. It's been, again, a tedious process, but it has yet proven to be effective for us. Kim, do you have anything?
Sure. So when we actually focused on branding, for us, branding was around creating a visual and content that it was consistent with who we are as a silk as defined by the Rehabilitation Act. So which is kind of interesting when you think about rebranding, it's not that you're going to change your message. It might be the way in which you're messaging, because we are always going to be the same. But I mean, our goals and our advocacy in IL is not going to necessarily change because it comes out of the Rehab Act and a movement, but we can update that content. So for us, what we did in terms of branding, I think about that in marketing, is that we redeveloped our website, made sure it was 508 compliant, which it wasn't before. We created a visual content so that when you see our logo or you see certain visual cues, you know it is Wasilk. We also updated the language to make sure that it was comprehensive and understandable and simple, so that people could grasp what IL for us meant. And then the other part of that rebranding or branding process for us was really becoming visible. And for us, that meant that we put our logo on everything that went out. That we, in developing those relations and in deepening our relationship with our centers, 4 years ago when I came on board, we had a little bit of discord within our state in our centers. And so I met with the directors and started rebuilding that relationship between the Silk and the Sills. And we did that in a very conscious way. It's not only the words that you say, but it's the actions that are congruent and consistent with the words that you say. So what you say, you do. And as we strengthen that relationship, then we could broaden our visibility. So center directors would then ask us to come join them in their areas across the state to have conversations, invite the Silk to meetings, so that we piggybacked the work and the effort that we were doing together as a center and then as a Silk, and continually kind of defining and letting folks know how we work together, how we work separately, and what we can do in terms of elevating that disability voice. So for us, that's what we did, and we've been successful in being at the table. People are now starting to say, oh, we need to invite this Wasilk to the table. We need that another disability voice. And I don't approach it as we're the only disability voice, but we are a significant statewide disability voice for cross disability. And I don't know all the answers to all the questions, but now I have this network of center directors and colleagues where I can reach out and get that information and provide that information. So that's how we've worked in our state around that. I want to pause for a second because we've been talking to you or at you for a while. I know that Kimberly has been looking at the Q&A questions and was wondering if there was a question or a topic that you would like us to address.
And Kim and Shelly, this is Kimberly. I'm seeing a lot of questions regarding intersectionality of disability and race. And also a question regarding when SIL directors are all Caucasian, how do you address the concern that our management does not reflect the people that we serve?
Sure. Well, that segues into kind of our next piece, is that intersectionality of disability and race. I mean, quite frankly, it is something for me that was on my radar, but not on my radar like it's been since May 27th. I think it's May 27th, with the killing of George Floyd. And that has elevated in our conversation. So that is, for me personally, I have recommitted and rededicated to becoming a better white ally. And that means for me that I am taking a white or a ally course that is a course that goes over a month, so that I can learn more about how I can be a better white ally. That means that I commit to being vulnerable and having hard conversations around race and disability. And it has been uncomfortable. And I'll tell you, the vulnerability and the uncomfortableness for me is I am scared of saying the wrong thing and hurting someone, or in my unlearning and learning, not knowing and then saying something that is lends to either hurting somebody or hurting a group of people or derailing my own commitment to this. And that is the biggest vulnerability for me, is to continue to do that, knowing I'm going to make mistakes. And that's the hardest part. And then when I make the mistake, address it. But that's the hardest part for me. And I'm committed to that, because I know that we cannot elevate that disability voice until we address the race piece. I don't know the answers, and what I can say is that we need to keep talking about it. I actually recently heard through the grapevine, yeah, that Kim, she's always bringing up the race thing, and wasn't said in a nice way, kind of like, yeah, like she's all over that. And I was like, oh, okay, good. Then I'm doing it right. Even though they're not happy with me, I'm doing something right. And so I just will continue to have that, continue to learn how to have that in a way that is respectful to the person that I'm talking to that might not agree with me, because it's easy to get caught up in the emotion. So I'm learning how to do that better, because I can be very passionate and very vocal. For those that know me, I'm being very demure right now. And I just keep at it and keep explaining, for me, how I see it, that we cannot truly elevate the disability community as a whole until we address the race, because you cannot leave a portion of you behind, a portion of your community behind, while you're trying to elevate. We've tried that and it doesn't work. So we need to, in my opinion, we need to continue doing that. It's not easy. This is probably, hopefully this is something for you to think about or ruminate about, because I don't know that there is concrete, do A, B, and C, and you'll get to D. It's really that blurredness of addressing it at any single moment. I'm gonna pause here and shift over to Shelly.
Absolutely, thank you, Kim. And very interesting questions. And believe it or not, it has been challenging for me myself. It is definitely a learning process. And I appreciate what Kim was able to talk about. And for me, in particular, being a Black woman, is being able to address some of these questions and concerns. When the situation of George Floyd, when that happened, I chose not to say anything because I felt at that particular point that the lines would be blurred. And it wasn't until I was actually asked by some of my colleagues who were white or Caucasian and say, like, here, I don't know which is best. And so let me kind of back up. When I try to address anyone, I usually say, hey, I need to be educated on some things because I have a hard time even with the LGBT community. So I have a couple of staff members who belong to the community. And so I said, please excuse my ignorance. I just don't know. Well, what do I need to do here? What should I say here? And I think that that is a good approach, not to offend, but to really just to educate yourself. I would recommend that you participate in some organizations and don't go offering any suggestions, but just to go and listen, saying that you want to be educated. I think a lot of organizations will be willing to provide information that will be helpful in learning. This is going to be a process that does not happen overnight. But getting back to the George Floyd situation, I wrote when I was asked about my feelings, I decided to sit down and write a little op-ed and put it on our website. It gained some traction. I believe that Nicole also took it and shared it. But believe it or not, one of my board members actually called our DSE or our designated state entity, the entity which our funds are funneled through, and made a complaint. And I knew exactly who it was, but it kind of bothered me because it was more from a perspective of a Black woman and not so much in regards to my position here. I was hesitant when I did that because of my positioning here. And so I made sure that I included disability along with that, and how people with disabilities, and in particular people with disabilities of color, are marginalized. And I just tried to bring that in. But like him, when I knew that somebody was uncomfortable, I knew that I had said something that made somebody think. And that's all we want people to do, is to make sure that people think about what they're doing, what they're saying, as to not offend. We are living in a climate right now that it's almost, well, it is apparently, it's not acceptable, but people are making it acceptable just to be simply unkind, mean-spirited, and for no reason. I think it is, here in Georgia, we try to be intentional with our board selection. We want a diverse board, again, to make sure that we represent everyone. Again, it's hard to make decisions and have people tell you what's right or what's wrong when you've never experienced some of the things that they've experienced. So for me, I liken it as to when you're speaking with an employer. How can somebody who is going to hire me, but they know nothing about disability? We want to see a reflection, just like with our peer support. We want to see people who are actually doing things in position and be able to go to them as peers or mentors, I think is absolutely essential to have a diverse board, diverse staff, and actually looking at that individual's qualifications. And also that provides the opportunity for people to train and to educate and to be able to put in positions of leaders, leaders for tomorrow. I was actually groomed by my predecessor and was completely unaware. And this is kind of for Christina, asked the question, how does the Georgia Silk foster growing leaders and assisting in transition from the old guard to the next generation? My predecessor was an older Caucasian woman, and I became her board chair. And again, she was grooming me, and I didn't even realize it. So we need to be able to look at some of the leaders that are coming in. Board members are great potential leaders. The centers usually work with individuals that may, appear to have high hopes. But it's all about grooming. I think it's great to get young minds. I have a few millennials on my staff, and they help bring things into context for me sometimes, but we need to be able to start looking at individuals that we're working with and really start to groom them in this process. For the directors who happen to be all Caucasian, start being intentional about going out to various organizations, whether you're at job fairs or any other kind of event, expos, and just start communicating with people. I usually will pass out my card and say, hey, check us out online. We would love to be able to have you. We cast our nets pretty wide. And I think once you get individuals engaged, I think that hopefully you will have a more diverse set of people that you may be able to choose from or select to groom and or to work with. We can I know the hour is far spent. We spent a lot of time kind of in this one area, but we can move on a little bit and we can come back a little bit later and try to address some of these other questions if you have any. And if you are not satisfied, we can come back and try to answer or give a little bit more detail. Kim, let me see where we are.
Yeah, I know we only have like 7 minutes left, Shelly. So Kimberly, I wanted to check in with you and see if there's any other like pertinent questions that folks are asking of us that we can address. I know we got a little late started, but which is fine. It's IL, right? You just shift and move and do a little something different.
That's right. We're always adaptable. There was one question that there's a few questions that have not been addressed yet, but we'll make sure that there's a written answer to in these. But one question was, one thing that I'd like to also see are discussions about how to best provide IL services and disability services advocacy with the very unique tribal communities, as well as for tribal citizens and non-tribal but rural and urban areas. Also other minority groups. How can providers find resources to learn more about culturally appropriate services for the different groups? Or what efforts are made within IL to learn about the communities they may serve and advocate for?
Wow, that was a big question. I don't think there is a simple answer. I think yesterday, Mel Levington and Christine, I forgot her last name, did a presentation on cultural competency. I don't know if you were able to attend that workshop, But if you're able to get the video or the transcription, I don't know how we're doing that with April. They actually had some very good actionable ways in which they went out and created relationships with tribal communities and other communities that aren't or that are underserved. And it was all about relationship building, and that relationship building came from a perspective, and I'm just really kind of putting this in a nutshell. There was a lot of really good information in their presentation, but it's about being very aware and cognizant about not going to those communities with your expectations and your culture, but to really sit and listen to what they're saying, what their needs are, and how it works in their communities, and then make those adjustments in the way that you provide your services. So that's my kind of in a nutshell answer, because that was a very big, a lot of components to that question. As far as our silk in Washington State, we have been very fortunate to have really good relationships and have tribal representation on our council. And they've been engaged with us in making those connections with other tribes in our state. We have 27 recognized tribes in our state and some unrecognized tribes in our state. So they've been able to make those connections as well. And then through the silk, actually make the connections with the local centers and with the tribes that are in those centers areas, and develop those relationships. And it's always ongoing and always working on that.
And Kim, and my apologies, I was reading some of the comments in the Q&A, or the questions that were in the Q&A section. To Dora, by all means, please reach out to me. That would be great. I would love to have a conversation with you. For Georgia, yes, this is an anonymous attendee. We are a 501c3, and it does impact our ability to advocate. Of course, you can do some advocating, or we don't call it the L word, we educate. But we are allowed to do some very small lobbying efforts. But I'm still a little iffy when it comes to that, so I educate. I don't answer anything. I try my best to form conversations in which I would be asked, well, what is needed? Well, what do you need? And then I go, well, I'm glad you asked. And be able to offer my, my opinion, or, what we would like to see happen within the community. So yeah, I'm a little leery about how it affects our ability to advocate. But again, it's all in the language, and we try to be very careful about how we form our questions and our educational materials. There was something to Mr. Daniel. How do we know when we have reached the point when we can focus less on race and more on disability rights? If there's another police shooting, does that just take us back to where we started? And I believe that all circumstances are different, but again, this is where we have the intersectionality, and whether it is race, whether it's our economic status, what happens when people who do not have good funding, or what about our medical care, when people with disabilities are also marginalized? when it comes to healthcare. And until we can address some of these issues and make sure that everyone is being treated fairly, unfortunately, we probably will have to come back and start all over, because apparently we're not doing something right in our advocacy, whether we're educating, bringing up the issues that are affecting the disability community. And all of it, again, it intersects. And so we have to, again, I believe, think outside the box, because it's all disability rights. But some within the disability community are still being treated or are still being marginalized within our own community. So unfortunately, no, I believe that, again, this is how we should develop better relationships, again, not only with disability communities, but other entities outside, and start to work with them to educate them on disability rights. And hopefully that will change the conversation and change the narrative. Nobody wants to keep going back having these conversations. And it's unfortunate that we still are having these conversations. But until we change our mindset, our approach, these will continue to happen over and over again, at least in my opinion. I think that it almost goes hand in hand. Ms. Cooper, have you had any implicit bias types of training in your states for the network? We are working on that. We're trying to find the best approach and something that will be useful and helpful, in particular to our board. Again, my board is diverse, and there are different opinions. And not to say that everyone's opinion is not received. We want that. We want to be able to have difficult conversations. We want to make sure that we have, I don't have thin skin anymore. I think when I first got into this position, I did, but I think constructive criticism is the best way to go. And there's always an approach. I think that we need to be mindful on how we approach one another. So we're trying to work on training for our board, and we hope to be able to start that within this new year.
All right, this is Kimberly, and we are out of time. The time is 1:03. You all did fantastic. Thank you so much for presenting this important topic. Also, for participants, I have put the survey link in the chat box. Please make sure to complete the survey. And thank you all for joining the session.
Thank you, everyone. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
For those who